Roxy, would you ever attend a church where you could see the pastor's chest?
What?
You know, like a church where the pastor, who is a guy, is, shall we say, deeply V-necked.
Oh, I don't know. It sounds like a stumbling block to me.
Remember, guys, modest is hottest.
From Religion News Service, this is Saved by the City, a podcast from two single Christian women making our way in New York without losing our shirts. Souls.
Souls.
I'm Roxy Stone.
And I'm Katelyn Beatty. When you decided to move to New York City, did you know, had you heard of Hillsong New York?
I actually did the first or one of the first articles about the Hillsong New York City church plant, and I interviewed Carl Lentz.
Okay. I have heard of him, yes.
And Joel Houston, who was a lead singer in Hillsong United, son of the church's founder and co-planter of Hillsong New York City.
Did you attend a service?
I did. Yeah.
What was it like?
Like a rock concert with some Jesus. I mean, it lived up to the hype in that way. They had it at Irving Plaza, which is a concert venue in kind of a Union Square area, which was not far from where I lived at the time. You had to literally get there early to stand in line because they kind of built this like sense of hype the way you would a rock concert. And so you would show up and they had the doors closed until a certain time. And so like by the time that they would open, there would be like a literal line like around the block. You know, people would stop and be like, what's going on? Who's playing?
Jesus Christ. Would you like to be introduced to him?
I only went once, and I had a friend who was going, and I just was kind of curious because I'd written about it. And so when I moved here, I was like, hey, can I go to a service with you? And went. And I mean, I'd been to enough non-denom type churches that had a little bit of that young adult, vibe. And so it wasn't like totally unfamiliar. And I knew some of the Hillsong songs because who doesn't,
right,
if you're part of evangelicalism. But it still was its own, like, it was a production.
Right. And
a lot of beautiful people on the stage.
Did you feel like you needed to dress cool going?
I did. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember exactly what I wore, because it was definitely like a cool kid scene. And a lot has happened at the quote unquote church of choice for Justin Bieber. The New York branch is still primarily virtual since the pandemic. I think they have like a little gathering every Sunday. Bieber has cut ties completely with the former, now disgraced lead pastor, Carl Lentz.
It does seem like not a week goes by without some kind of bad news coming out.
Yeah, it's a snowball over there. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the next year brings, but I imagine it's going to bring a lot.
You're saying that there is more on the way, potentially.
Yeah, I think that snowball's going to keep rolling.
Okay.
Keep gaining momentum.
Got it.
Well, we wanted to take some time to figure out what exactly happened with Hillsong, what went wrong, and what does this saga reveal about the pitfalls of a church like Hillsong, a church that seems to have been built on celebrity?
This is a good topic for us. We have the person who broke the news of Carl Lentz's resignation / firing as one of our co-hosts.
So you're going to be like my Michael Barbaro.
Yes, I will be your Barbaro. To start out, it's probably good to go back to the very beginning. So, Roxy, how did Hillsong become Hillsong? Where did it all start?
The church was founded in the suburbs of Sydney, Australia in 1983 by Brian and Bobby Houston. Brian's father had also been a pastor. He'd grown up in New Zealand and moved to Sydney. And the church that he started was sort of modeled after the churches he'd grown up with, his father's churches. And then he went to America and witnessed some of the success of American Pentecostal pastors and televangelists in the U.S. And when he went back to Australia, he sort of brought these ideas with him about using media, about just sort of a cool factor to the church. And it was around that time he gave one of his most famous sermons, The Church I See. in which he sort of cast a vision for a global church. And you can find this sermon online, and he's given it a few more times since then. But he sort of kind of has this preacher like, the church I see is, the church I see is, the church I see is in the major cultural centers of the world. And he sort of talks about how he sees a global church. And the church just really starts to grow after that, after he returns from the States. And he begins to plant churches in Australia, and it becomes something of a phenomenon there.
So Brian Houston always had his sights set on wanting churches in major cultural hubs, like in cities, as a way of attracting people with some sense of social clout or power who could be introduced to Christ and then have like a cultural influence that would spread out into the world eventually.
Precisely. You're familiar with the 7 cultural mountains idea? That was infused in his thinking. Like, we need to have churches that have people within them who have influence over these 7 mountains of culture, politics and entertainment and education, etc.
And obviously, a lot of people must have responded to this vision because Hillsong grew significantly in the 90s and 2000s.
It did.
What do you think was key to that success? Like, how did it become this big global phenomenon?
The really short answer is their music. Worship artists, including some rather famous ones. You know, the sound of the music felt very familiar to people who were listening to like pop radio at the time. They also had like TV programs in Australia. Brian and Bobby began to write books. They were on the radio. They were using that playbook. They haven't always been beloved by everyone, but they did grow in a lot of popularity in Australia and then began to start looking globally. And a big part of the way that they did that was at first to license their worship music. And so, I mean, I remember singing Hillsong worship songs in some of my early evangelical experiences, like in college.
I definitely remember singing Shout to the Lord all the time.
Yeah.
Shout to the Lord on the earth, let us sing. Power and majesty, praise to the King. Mountains bow down.
Worship was beginning to become an umbrella type of ministry. Contemporary Christian music had almost always been like what you might listen to in the car, like Amy
more
Grant.
singer-songwriter.
Yes. And now it was becoming like driven by worship music. So Hillsong was a big part of that trend. They were making a lot of money from that, a lot of royalties from that. And then they set up Hillsong College and they began training like worship pastors and eventually training in ministry. And people would come to Australia for that. So fast forward to 2010, Hillsong New York City was the first church plant in the U.S.
And it must have been strategic to be planted in New York because New York City is perceived to be the seat of cultural power. And they chose a young man who, to my knowledge, had not been like a known leader in the church prior.
No, he was a pastor, a young adult pastor, I guess, in North Carolina. And he had attended Hillsong College.
Right. So he had gone over, been trained in the Hillsong style.
Met his wife there, which is very common. Almost all of the pastors at Hillsong churches went to Hillsong College, met their wives there.
Well, they're probably kind of hot. I mean, the wives. So can you really blame?
Yeah, they're all hot.
That is not something Michael Barbaro would say. But I let the persona slip. Okay, getting back to Lentz. So obviously the church started getting a lot of buzz, a lot of attention in the United States. It started growing, and Lentz himself was a big part of that. So what do you think his appeal was? Like, why had he been selected to kind of lead Hillsong's entry into the American landscape?
I have theories. He's a handsome man. He's incredibly charismatic. I heard him preach a couple of times. He's a good preacher. He's very engaging. Just being in his presence, you got like a buzz because he was really he seemed to engage with people really well on a personal level, but then also he would get on stage and he just had, he had the it factor. So, I think there's like genuine reasons why someone like that would be selected to lead a church like this. And he wasn't afraid he didn't shy from the celebrity. Like he took the interviews, all these major media outlets that were like, whoa, what is this church meeting in like a rock venue and this pastor with his tattoos and his leather jacket. And he went on and he charmed everybody. Anderson Cooper was like, you've never met a pastor like this before. And
I've met some versions of this, but yes, most people have not.
Yes, indeed. So it was, it just kind of, he got the media storm out of it. But the big thing that happened was that the church began to attract celebrities, including Justin Bieber, including Selena Gomez. Some of the Kardashian sisters went there. Tyler Chandler, who's an NBA star, went there. And eventually, apparently, Justin Bieber was baptized in his bathtub by Carl Lentz. But also, according to new reports, a lot of other things were happening at that same party.
Well, we'll definitely get to that.
Yeah, I don't want to jump ahead too far.
But it seems like part of the strategic approach with Hillsong New York was picking a highly visible lead pastor who would in some ways look like a New Yorker,
and a celebrity.
Who was a celebrity in his own right.
No, I mean, he looked like a celebrity. Like he's walking along with Bieber and
you can't necessarily tell like who's
the pastor and who's the celebrity.
Any picture that I have ever seen of Carl Lentz, there is some visible pectoral muscle going from deep V-neck to
shirtless.
The one picture that I remember is like
the famous picture.
Him and Justin Bieber like walking on the beach or something, and he is totally shirtless, and his pants are slung extremely low.
No, he's got like the Ken Barbie doll groin lines.
Yes, and I just think,
yeah,
was this not a yellow flag? Maybe. There's some dynamic here where natural attractiveness and charisma could very easily be used or abused if it's combined with the power that he obviously had in the church and the broader Hillsong network.
Yeah, and I think he wasn't alone in that. I mean, if you look at Hillsong pastors pretty much across the board, like they are beautiful people. Hillsong has this thing where the head pastors of every church are a husband and wife. They come as a couple. So when the husband gets fired, as we've seen a lot lately, the wife also leaves. But they are both beautiful. And there's an awareness of that beauty, a playing up of that beauty. You see it on their Instagrams. You see it in just sort of like, just generally the aesthetic of the church celebrates that level of like sexiness and attractiveness.
Right. So fast forward to November 4th, 2020, you broke the news in a report for a religion news service that Lentz was stepping down after admitting to having an extramarital affair. And then over the coming weeks and months, and even up until now, news has emerged of allegations against Lentz of bullying, abuse of power, forms of sexual abuse. Even beyond the allegations of abuse, there are broader concerns about the church culture that, former staff members and volunteers have talked about, kind of working around the clock to keep the church going, not receiving fair pay or any pay, while kind of the top leaders can kind of do whatever they want with little recourse and splurge on fancy things, and no one's going to say anything. So not just specific allegations of abusive behavior, but kind of a culture of people at the top being able to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So it does seem safe to say that the issue isn't just with Lentz's personal failings.
It's become really clear that there's so much more going on. Having reported on this one step at a time as it's been unfolding, it began to feel like Lentz was a fall guy. Like a little bit of Hillsong wanting to say for a while, it was all Carl Lentz. Carl Lentz was the problem. Carl Lentz was out of control. I mean, there was like a leaked recording of Brian Houston talking about how bad Carl Lentz was. Houston is like, I've had reservations for a really long time. That kind of a recording gets leaked for a reason. And so it sort of felt like, okay, now that he's gone, we're good. And we're going to take these steps to make sure that doesn't happen again. But since then, we're beginning to see like Lentz was a problem, but he wasn't the only problem. And in fact, even some of the problems of Lentz probably originated in Australia and in the position he was put in and in the position he was asked to play, the character he was asked to play. We've had allegations of rape against other Hillsong pastors and evidence that the board knew about that and still kept that person on as a pastor. And now we have Brian Houston, the lead pastor, founding pastor, global senior pastor, has resigned. And he resigned after allegations came out against him of sexual misconduct against women, inappropriate texting with a Hillsong staffer, and then an occasion at a Hillsong conference where he was drinking and in a room with a woman who had attended the conference. And they say nothing happened, but no one knows. But anyway, so he has now resigned. And of course, even going back before that, long ago, Brian Houston's father, who was also a pastor, was accused of sexually molesting a young boy and eventually confessed to that. But for a long time, he'd been being investigated. And now Brian Houston is facing trial in Australia for not disclosing evidence to the police at the time. So it's all very messy and goes well beyond like Carl Lentz had a tequila-drenched love affair with a Brooklyn-based jewelry designer.
I'm actually kind of surprised that Hillsong has managed to stay afloat this long, you know? But it also goes to show that abuse and misconduct always happen in a cultural context. Like it's never just the one person who is acting sinfully or criminally. You know, it's also an entire structure of power that enables someone to abuse, that essentially allows them to feel like they can without recourse. And if you put someone like Carl Lentz on a pedestal and kind of hire him in part because of his attractiveness and charisma and then don't offer any sort of accountability, you're basically setting him up to fail. And then when you say the fall guy and then like making him bear the brunt of the problem as if it's just his problem without also taking responsibility for how a church culture set him up to fail.
Yeah, I mean, it's systemic. It seems to be baked in. And I think what we saw, especially, you know, at Hillsong, New York City, was like that like rock star idea, like this conceit that this church is sort of like going to a rock concert. Like you actually ended up with rock stars up there. And they began to act like celebrities who were like above all the rules. And in a lot of ways they were above the rules.
Yeah, one of the details that I found in researching my book on celebrity in the church seems mildly relevant is that Hillsong New York had a VIP section at one point.
Yes.
So if you showed up and you were somebody famous or you had an inside track, you would be escorted by security guards or staffers to the front section. And then later on, you could come backstage and interact with Lentz and the worship band and like be treated like VIP.
Yeah.
Like, this is weird. This is not a Christian concept at all. This is a very not Christian concept. I'm done being Michael Barbaro now. Let's just talk as friends.
That sounds good. But first, let's give a shout out to our sponsors.
Religion News Service is an independent, award-winning source of global reporting on religion, spirituality, culture, and ethics.
And while you're there, check out all of the reporting on Hillsong because, take it from me, there is a lot of it.
And Roxy has done a very good job at breaking a lot of it.
Oh, thank you.
If you like what we're doing at Saved by the City, let us know. Throw us a rating or a review, which goes a long way to helping get the word out about our show.
You can also email us at sbtcpodcast@religionnews.com. We'd love to hear from you. So to come back to your very first question, Katelyn, about whether I would attend a church where I could see the pastor's chest.
To be clear, the male pastor's
the male pastor's chest. I am increasingly squeamy about that. And
wait, you were okay with it for a while, and now you're like,
well, I think I attended churches like that. I mean, my pastor in Orlando had a pretty deep V a lot of Sundays. That was a thing for a while.
It was a thing, and if you go to the Preachers and Sneakers Instagram account, curated by Ben Kirby, you will see it is still a thing. And some of those V-necks ain't cheap.
Yeah, and I'm not going to police what my pastor, who I really appreciate and care for, wears. And if he's goes through a V-neck stage, I'm not going to stop going to our church. But I don't remember which of the many pastors featured on Preachers and Sneakers, where I went, maybe it was Chad Veach, where I was on a deep dive into
a deep V
Instagram.
dive.
And I'm just yeah. And it's not just him. It was his whole family. And it just all felt very curated to have a sex appeal. And I was what is going on here? This feels deeply strange to me. And it reminds me a little bit of there's the Righteous Gemstones TV show, there's even Tammy Faye, there's a history of really of particularly within the Pentecostal tradition of pastors really being beautiful and emphasizing their
physical appearance,
and
having clothing that really draws attention to itself. Whether it's
so I don't think this is new, but the sexiness thing is new, a little bit new to me.
I don't know if you remember this, Roxy, but growing up, we heard a lot about the virtue of modesty.
It brings, I remember that vaguely. Yeah.
Obviously, there's a double standard in how modesty is taught. It was kind of meant for women, not to make men stumble. In addition to it being taught in a hypocritical way, it's also kind of missing the broader Christian teaching on modesty, which isn't so much deep V's are always bad and sinful, or even luxury clothing is always and everywhere sinful, but is the motive to draw attention to yourself and kind of impress other people.
Right.
And draw people in with sex appeal or the appearance of wealth. Or is your desire to be approachable? And I would think that as pastors, you'd want to emphasize that you are there to serve God and people and not to draw attention to yourself. And I'm sure that, pastors like Carl Lentz or Chad Beach have done good in those roles, but the image that they present to the world does not communicate that. I think part of the reason these churches and these pastors have gotten so much media attention, including on Preachers and Sneakers, is that I think we just intuit that
there's something incoherent there. Yeah.
Of all people, church leaders should be leading from a different posture.
Right. And I think there's probably forever a pendulum swing, of you've got this idea of pastors are deeply uncool and they don't drink and they don't have any style and they don't have any tattoos and they're just Puritans, And then there's
or fuddy-duddies.
A swing to like
Pastor Jim from Topeka.
Exactly. And then there's sort of this swing to pastors are the coolest, sexiest beasts that we've ever seen, And it's so tempting for the media to sort of go grab onto that and be like, oh, these pastors are cool. They drink. They go to rock concerts, and it's just, so I mean, I get it, but, I even remember when I was working at Relevant, like when Relevant first came out, it was like, oh, Christians can listen to secular music, and so I think there's like this idea of like, let's like trying to dispel these stereotypes of
Only
like
Mumford and
being
Sons.
a Christian means, yes.
Because it kind of already sounds like Christian music.
But there's this idea of dispelling this conception that Christians are just boring and can't enjoy anything in the world and are, wearing our like hair shirts and just serving the poor all day.
Yes, and for a pastor like Carl Lentz, having seemingly real connections and friendships with actual celebrities who are like actually very cool and fly around in private jets and have people attend their concerts by the millions, like there's a sense of cultural validation there or acceptability.
Right.
Or I have gotten the imprimatur of Justin Bieber. So if Justin Bieber approves and Justin Bieber also loves Jesus, maybe it's not so bad to consider whether you could also be a Christian. Like if your hang up with Christian faith is that you will no longer be cool, these people come along and say, no, you can be cool and love Jesus at the same time. I think I'm just at a point, and maybe it's my age and just recognizing that I'm never really going to be cool in this way. I'll never be able to pull off a deep V-neck. I'm at a place where I want church to be boring and decidedly uncool. I want the sermon to be a little bit boring. I want us to sing hymns that have like 3 too many verses to them and use archaic language. And I want my priest to wear vestments. I want him to wear a robe so I'm never thinking about what he's wearing, like cool or uncool. It's just the uniform that signifies that he is there to serve. I realize this sounds like high church snobbery, but I'm distrustful of churches where I feel like they're trying too hard.
Yeah, and certainly boring churches have had their problems too, and even have hoarded wealth and all the rest. But I do think there's,
Shoot.
Yeah.
All right. I got to rethink this strident view.
I've seen the jewels in some of those crowns, but I know what you're getting at. Like, I understand that celebrities need pastors too. I think it'd be great if their pastors acted more like pastors and less like celebrities. But I think that Bieber seems to have had a real life change and been very positively influenced by these pastors in his life, and I think that's good. I don't want pastors to like refuse to minister to celebrities, but I think, it shouldn't come at the cost of like you have to deny these aspects of the calling of Jesus, which includes like service to the poor and caring about the marginalized and probably caring at a level about the modesty of your clothing in terms of what it costs and where it comes from and what it is conveying. And are you privileging your celebrity congregants over your poor congregants or your less cool congregants? And those, I think, are critical questions that you need to be asking if you have that level of influence and have that level of access. That's a temptation for sure.
Yes, I have heard, and I address this in my book on celebrity, I have heard the rationalization that, yes, celebrities need Jesus and wealthy people need Jesus. So shouldn't pastors be free to minister to people with immense social power and people with a lot of wealth? Yes, but Jesus did not become wealthy in order to minister to wealthy people. Like he was free in ways that very few of us actually are. But he seemed free to be able to minister to people across social strata and with a lot of social power and no social power. But at the end of the day, I think we'd say that Jesus had a preferential option for people who were on the outskirts. That is why he was so radical in his ministry, was his willingness to go to like the farthest reaches,
I don't think Jesus used the celebrities he ministered to as a strategy to reach a broader audience, which I think is...
He wasn't like, bro, take a selfie. Let's post it.
Yeah, exactly. think I got in a fight about this, and you were there once.
Yeah, it was at the seminary.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't a fist fight, to be clear. It was you got
We were in
into a
fist
debate with someone who was like, the celebrities need Jesus too, so why are we dunking on these pastors? I'm like, it's a little more complicated than that.
It is. And I think I also was not nuanced in my response because, we'd had a drink.
You don't get more nuance the more that you drink.
And I think I was like, no, we all should be like Dorothy Day.
Yeah, of course.
And so it was a really productive conversation.
Most of us cannot be like Dorothy Day, but I think I think the pendulum should swing more toward Dorothy Day than where we currently are. Saved by the City is a religion news service production. The producer is Jay Woodward, and the consulting editor is Paul O'Donnell.
Chaz Rousseau put together our look, and Martin Fowler wrote our theme music.
We are Katelyn Beatty
and Roxy Stone.
Thanks for listening.
I'm Roxy. I know you're here. I'm Roxy Stone.